Now, this is going to seem like I have gone for something which is the opposite of the question being asked, but bear with me. Bear with me. Because the question put by Steve was how were navies persuaded of seemingly bad ideas, i.e. iron not wooden ship, steam not sail, the all big gun ship. And I've changed that to building ships out of time, i.e. why build wood in an iron world? And there's a reason for this. You see, it's the debates which go on at the time. It's the conflict they have. It might seem obvious to us in history, when we look backwards, when we're looking backwards at these things, it might seem obvious that, well, that these things go straight ahead. They go straight forward. They are obvious, you know. There must be an easy answer to this. This must be the best, and this, then this, and therefore that's why you need to build it, and you shouldn't be building anything else. The reality is complicated. The reality is that, despite things like the aluminium can being developed, the glass bottle hung on for quite a while, disappeared, and has come back again. Because it's now renewable, and plastic is now bad. But still, the cans have remained. Although they've changed a bit over time. They have changed a bit over time. And it's the same when we get on to bigger things, which are systems of systems. What you're looking for in a ship will define what you build it with, and what characteristics you're looking for in it. Now, if we start off, the easiest one to start off with is sailing ships, built when steam had definitely arrived. Well, they're still building sailing ships for quite a while after steam has arrived. Because it's not an easy answer. You see, steam has some advantages. It means you don't have to worry about the wind. You're no longer going to get becalmed. You're no longer going to be in a scenario where you've got minimal wind. You have no control over yourself. You have no ability to move yourself. You have to rely on deploying men in boats or using the anchor or all sorts of things to try and move forward when you don't have to if you have steam power. But steam power itself comes with problems. You have to carry coal. You have to have coaling stations to be able to resupply the coal. You have to maintain the engines. Engines are far more difficult to maintain than a mast and sails. Then you carry spare bits of wood. And you can refashion masts and you can refashion sails of canvas. With engines, there are whole parts which can go wrong. Boilers which can go boom. These are issues you have to deal with. So yeah, there are arguments for and against on both sides. For and against on both sides. But still, they kept building both for quite a while. See, we can go back in time and say, well, the first steamship to be launched for a navy was 1815. The Demalogos of the US Navy. Yeah, the US Navy got the first steamship in 1815. And it was sensible for them. It was a useful thing for them to be pushing for. But then we have the Royal Navy return, and you see, the first ships realistically are actually the small ones, the tugs, the assets like that they can be useful for. By 1830s, they're becoming de rigueur. Everyone's got steam engines, everyone's got steamships, but at the same time, the Royal Navy lays down things like HMS Queen, a first rate. As a 110-gun first-rate ship of line, no steam power, just in completely sail ship. She would have been not out of place at all in Nelson's fleet 24 years earlier. Frigate me, should have probably fitted in the fleets 75 years earlier. possibly even 100 years earlier, without too much trouble. They'd have been able to operate there quite happily. So why is there a sudden change? Well, one of the things you have to remember about navies is they both are faced with two forces constantly. One, the fear of being left behind, and two, the fear of being rendered useless. And those two fears are constantly driving them. The fear of being left behind keeps them pushing forward. The fear of their equipment being useless because they go down the wrong avenue and they end up with something which is useless keeps them trying to hold back and doing the most conservative leaps forward possible. This is why you end up with the Royal Navy doing the process it has when it comes to the dreadnoughts and the slow rate of evolution, all those things. And this is why you have, even to this day, navies seem to be incredibly conservative organisations. It's why so many of us who are historians and who watch these things laugh when they make pronouncements like, well, the first uncrewed escort vessel will be in service in 2 years' time. No, it won't. It won't be. Okay, let me rephrase that. There could well be uncrewed USVs, escorts, which are being used, little sort of patrol boat size things, which are being used to escort frigates and destroyers through places like the, Straits of Hormuz. But no. And you know how there's not going to be anything bigger? You know how I know that? Because they haven't yet even built the infrastructure to build anything bigger. It's not there. They haven't yet realistically deployed enough testers to test it out, because operating at sea is going to be interesting. They haven't got the ships that those things are going to be integrating with yet. They'll need those in service first. And there's all sorts of things which are going to have to be done before they have them available. But they use the phrase escorts, because knowing everyone's going to think about them are going to be bigger ships, like the Type 26, like the Type 21, like the Constellation class, all those things. They're not. They're just not. The tech isn't at the level at which they trust enough yet. But they make these announcements because no one wants to be looked like they're being left behind. But they also know no one's going to hold them to the account for these announcements. No one ever does. In this age, everyone's looking at steamships. They're growing more and more capable. They're getting more and more reliable. But no one really wanted to punt first until they had to. Once they had to, the Royal Navy does a whopping massive building program. If you go and look up steamships at a line, and you look at how many each navy have, I've done a video on this in the past on my channel, you very quickly find out the Royal Navy has more than pretty much everyone else combined at several points. They're very slow to do it, but once they get there, once they decide it's necessary, oh boy, do they go for it. And they really do go for it. But it's once it's necessary. And then we have wooden ships when iron is available. Now, normally, I tend to point out the US Navy in this one, and the US Civil War. And how the fact that most of the fighting, the famous battles, remember, are done by Ironclads. And they do like 10% of the overall fighting? Maybe 5%? It's really depends on what you judge as an actual ironclad and what isn't. There are some paddle steamers which have an bit of a lump of iron, of railway iron usually, strapped on the front. And some class them as ironclads, and there's me going, iron shielded, maybe? I'm not sure I'd call that an ironclad, but it works for their needs. The fact is, there are lots of navies in this period, which we're talking about when we're talking about the 1860s, when armour is coming in. But here we have two navies, which are fighting each other in a war between nations. The Austrians win the battle, Lisa, by the way. And you start looking through it and go, you have a ship of the line fighting in this battle. They did. It did fight in the battle. There are some from visas, and anything which is not listed as being armoured or iron is not armoured, and it does not have any iron in it. And the Italians even turn up with some paddle wheel corvettes, as well as screw corvettes, because those were a thing still at the time. These are battles like you get through history. In other words, you will have a period which we call the Ironclad Age, or the Dreadnought Age. And so you'd presume all the battleships fighting it must be dreadnoughts. No. No. In fact, the last pre-dreadnought in service goes out just before World War... Well, no, there are the Greek-American ships. We'll leave those to one side. They're semi-dreads more than pre-dreads. The last true pre-dread, if we're going to call them that rather than the Royal Sovereign type, which is what I prefer to call them, is leaving service in the 1930s. The French have the Dantons in service till, oh good lord, well into the 1930s. This is what history's normally like at sea. We have a strange period when we look at it called the Age of Sail, where no one really thinks about the age of ships involved because they're all the Age of Sail ships and it's quite homogenous for quite a long time. But some of the ships involved in some of the battles are very old. HMS Victory was very old when she took part in the Battle of Trafalgar. To be precise, 40 years old by the time when she's at the Battle of Trafalgar. 40. The thing is, this is quite common through history, because ships tend to be long-lasting items, especially if they're well maintained, and as long as they still have use. HMS Warrior was on the books as being a useful warship for a long time. Long after Ironclad frigate stops being a useful vessel for the battle fleet, she was still considered useful for the cruising fleet, for going around the world and being a presence where you needed a presence and you needed one in time of war, so you could send better ships elsewhere. And this still even comes back to construction, because sometimes the ships you're going to build are the ships you can build, not necessarily the ones you want to build, i.e., can all your yards produce ironclads? No. Do you have enough iron production to produce as many ironclads as you want ships? No. Okay then, you have a problem. You either don't have enough ships to do all the tasks you need to do, or you accept ships which are not going to be ironclads. Those are your options. Well, if you're sensible, you accept the ships which are not ironclads. You do that because you still need to fulfill those tasks. The thing is, you want the ironclads because they can turn every other ship into matchsticks and survive their fire, and the only things which have a chance against explosive shells. That's the theory. But the trouble is, I do say the trouble is, you can't build enough. The nation which, again, in this period and time period, can build the most ironclads is Britain. That's one of the reasons why it's able to secure its position. We talk about its naval infrastructure, its industrial capacity, its ability to smelt vast amounts of iron and other materials were critical in this period to maintaining its ascendancy. There is a very real possibility that the British lose their position as the #1 maritime power in the world in this period because they built all their power on the wooden walls in the Age of Sail, and now it's an armoured world, so surely that should allow new powers to rise up. But Britain still had the industrial capacity, and Britain was able to harness that industrial capacity to deliver those ships. For others, investing in enough ironclads was extortionate. They were the first rates of their era. And you have armoured frigates and corvettes. They're the second and third rates of their era. Once you sort of start getting into it, the large ironclads followed by the various armoured frigates. And then below it you have the wooden ships. the 4th, 5th and 6th rates of their era. And that's what we're looking at. When we're seeing this battle, we're seeing that form out. We're going, okay, you've got first rates. Oh, you've got 9 and 4. Okay. You got some second rates. An armoured frigate, 1 on this side and 3 on that side. Okay. You got 2 armoured corvettes. Oh, they're about third rates. Then you got a ship of the line. Well, ship of the line is theoretically very powerful, but in the modern world, is it? It can deliver a lot of firepower, but it's a glass cannon. It is a glass cannon in theory, isn't it, on this paper? Gets hit by enough explosive shells, it's going to go boom. It's going to be gone. Sorry, just realised that Copilot had once again managed to strike, and I thought I managed to disable it, but he has a habit of turning the battle Lisa into spelling with a Y rather than I, and I have no idea why Copilot does that on my computer, but it does. Microsoft, your AI is testing me. I am disabling it on everything I can, but it keeps testing me. But leaving that to one side, and it is Battle Lisa with an I, please note. The Kaiser, which was the ship of the line in this battle, gets out of this fight dismasted. In terms of its foremast is gone, but the 92-gun ship is pretty much okay. It's got a glancing blow on the bow, but it's pretty much survived quite well, and frankly, as far as we know, hangs around till sometime after 1918. We're not sure where it goes, what happens to it after 1918, but we do know it disappears sometime after 1918. It was seized by Italy as a war prize, and we're not sure what the Italians did with it. Officially. Unofficially, my theory is they just broke it up for scrap wood, but leave that to one side. The thing is, the Battle of Lisa is this colossal battle for its time, but it's also very historically apt to look at, because it's a time when you are putting fleets together with what you have available and what you can build. And you want the Ironclad ships. You need that core of the best ships you can build to build a fleet around. Because if you don't have that core, then the enemy's core is going to wipe you out. Rather comes about, and that's other things we're going to be talking about, but as time goes on. But it's one of the lessons of history is that sometimes you have to go with what you need rather than necessarily what you want, or what will be easiest. And this is definitely one. Muzzle-loading cannon. Muzzle-loading cannon. Now, this one was always one of the more interesting things to me, because for me it's quite an obvious thing to want to go for a breech cannon, a breech loading gun, because it's going to be so much quicker to fire, and you don't have to pull the cannon, the gun or cannon, whatever you want to call it, in. And that's what it is, whatever you want to call it. It really is. There is, before anyone starts to sort of get very upset, what we refer to as modern as gun and barrel, modern barrel construction, we're in the period of transition where, if you start looking at these barrels and look at the way they're being constructed, etc., they are starting to look more and more like the barrels we're going to associate them with, the weapon systems we're going to associate them with, as things go on. But at this point, they're very much still cannon as well, in their shaping, their design, and the way they're built up. And there's a whole interesting point about, especially in terms when we start talking about the British, the Royal Ordnance Company, Woolwich Arsenal, their specialty was making the chambers larger, so you could pack in more explosive than the actual size of the weapon, of the ball which would go through. So it was all about how you wadded it, how much powder you put in, etc. But that would allow you, of course, to get more force out of the ball when it's fired, out of the shell when it's fired when using shells, and that meant you ended up with needing a longer barrel to be able to make use of that force, make use of that power. But the thing is, they're really worried for quite a while about the breaches blowing up. And they are actually more worried on the larger guns than they are on the smaller guns. So despite the fact that either having to expose crew to rearm your guns, or pull your guns inside your turrets, which makes your turrets massive, Because you imagine if you've got to have a turret which is big enough for the entire gun to roll back into, and be loaded, and then be rolled out and fired. Yeah, it's a lot of space. It takes up a lot of space, and it makes for a very, very big, unwieldy unit for its time. And the interesting thing is, the breech loaders are around for a while before they get in. I'm just using the British as an example here because the British used the rifled muzzle loading 12-inch 35-ton gun. This one. For almost, please note I'm not saying every, almost every class of battleships from the Devastation 1873 till the Ajax in 1880. It's not until 1882 that the Colossus is launched and they're armed with the breech-loading 12-inch gun. This one. You might think, okay, well, Alex, that sounds like a pretty decisive thing. So when you start to realise that the Elswick Ordnance Company had been advertising a proved, please note, a proved 12-inch gun, which was breech-loading since 1877, and proved means it's gone through a certain number of firings and worked. And Woolwich Arsenal had been working on one since 1879. So in simple terms, we're talking about something which is 5 years later than it could have been if they'd just gone with when it was available. And considering it would have been it was cutting edge when it came in, still you could argue, but it's not the cutting edge. It's a long time after it had been that. We're talking a good decade and a half. In fact, in the time they start fitting the RML 12-inch 35-ton, there has been a lot of large breech loaders developed. And that is an interesting bit of history when you consider the ships they're building at the time. And the firing ranges they're taking part in them, and they're thinking about them. Because also, here's the thing, the closer the firing range, the more exposed the crew are. This is the really weird thing. This is one of the reasons why you build turrets, why you have ships of the line, have, all that. We mostly count the cannon which are inside the ship, on the gun decks, undercover, not the ones who are exposed on the top deck. Why? Because those tend to get their crews taken out quite early in the fight. If you're fighting anyone who's got any sense, because they can take them out more quickly, because they're exposed. And exposing crew slows down your ability to fire, slows down your ability to fight. So breech loading makes a lot of sense. But it's also a risk. Are you sure it's not going to blow up on you? Because realistically, which can the Royal Navy afford to lose more? A few gunners, or a turret in an action? And the whole gun crew. And possibly the ship if the explosion spreads to the magazine. Let's put it this way. Which runs the risk of losing them the battle and losing them the war? The greater risk. So you're always edging your bet, hedging slightly for safety, slightly for what can best provide you with the capability, but not necessarily provide you with the risk. That's what you're looking for. With that being said, though, Shane's book plug time. Shane's book plug. Well, I don't know. I've not been having a good time recording the last couple of days. I've been having lots of delays, so I'm about 6 recordings behind, and I need to try and catch up on them, because if everything goes to plan, I go away to Japan in 11 days. 11 days, which means I've got a maximum of 10 days for recordings to do recordings, and that means in practice I've got about 8 days to do recordings, because 2 of those days in there are going to be Sundays. And Sundays I don't do any recording on. So, yeah, and I've got to record a whole lot of videos. I think I have to record about 16. So that's 2 a day, if everything goes to plan. Which, it should be viable. My record is 4 in a day, but I'm trying to be better with myself at the moment. I'm trying to manage myself more and not overwork myself. But we'll see. We'll see. You'll know if I've done it all, because all the videos will be stacked up and ready for me to go, and there'll be even a week's overload, a week's extra done for when I get back. So I will not, I will have all the videos done for October that will go through all the weeks till I get back. That's the plan. That is the cunning plan, to have all the videos done so that when I get back I am fine and everything is nice and easy, and I have a few days peace. But we'll see. We will see. We will see. Cross fingers. And I thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, helping the channel grow and all the stuff, and yeah, thank you for being so supportive, and thank you for making Japan possible. Thank you. Now, the Danton class are not the only ones. They're not the only dreadnoughts built in the age of dreadnought. And there's a lot of reasons for not building a dreadnought. For starters, do you know it's going to work? Do you have the technology to make it work? Do you, and by technology I mean, do you have the ability to produce that larger ship with that many large guns, with all those turrets, with all those the fire control systems, everything else that goes into making a dreadnought system work? And for France, that was actually something they were working on. They needed a number of ships. There's also the fact that if you're thinking about operating in the Mediterranean, if you're thinking about operating as colonial defense, do you really need a dreadnought for that? The vast majority of ships in the world aren't dreadnoughts. The vast majority of there are cruisers. It's worthwhile building a battleship still, which is on more traditional lines. These ships served till 1937. And look at them. They honestly fit the same pattern that goes for the Lord Nelsons. It really does. These ships are pure semi-dreadnoughts. Or rather, they are the level of Royal Sovereigns being built when dreadnoughts come into existence. But what are the good things about them? Well, they're designed for closer range fighting, which is why the 9.4-inch guns are actually a better choice. Because you're at close range, they have a higher rate of fire. You don't need the larger guns, you don't need the larger range, because you're going to be engaging more closely. And the whole point is, therefore, a dirtier, nastier fight. They really are not for a Tsushima-style battle. They're for a Trafalgar-style battle. A Lisa-style battle. They're for a battle which is swirling, manoeuvring, close range. They're not for standoff engagements. They're not for blasting at each other from range. They're for getting in close and getting the kill. What's interesting is when you look at some of the later battle doctrines with dreadnought battleships and some of the later dreadnought battleship doctrines, they also prioritize getting in close for the kill. But, what can I say? It works. And realistically, if you're France at this point, you have a sincere choice. Either build Dantons, or don't build anything. Because you're working on rebuilding and upgrading your infrastructure, on making it possible so you can get to the level so you can catch up. But realistically, France is, thanks to the legacy of the Junior Coal and governmental changes and oversight, in a similar space as Germany finds itself in World War II after the legacy of the Treaty of Versailles, where they are about a generation or two behind in their construction capabilities because of the loss of institutional memory, because of the loss of infrastructure, because they're having to rebuild it all from scratch. And the thing is, skills like shipbuilding are built upon generations. They are evolutionary skills that you grow up, and like most of these industries, actually, there's a bit of an art in them as well as a science. And we can, as much as we try and make up for that loss of art with as much science as we can, there is still some art to it. There is still some art to it. You know, there's that old saying about aircraft, if it looks right, it'll fly right. 99% of the time, that's true. That's not science, that's art. I'm saying that. And so for France, it was a very simple scenario. As said, as I've made point, they had to build something, so they built something. It wasn't necessarily the best ship they could build, but it worked. It worked. It was the best they could build in large enough numbers to provide them with the mass they needed. They could possibly have built a single dreadnought. They could possibly have built a single dreadnought, or maybe even a couple of dreadnoughts, if we consider the fact that there are 6 in this class. That's 12-inch turrets. You could theoretically have equipped a couple of dreadnoughts. Theoretically. But would that have provided enough ships to be in enough places to do enough duties? And yes, if these ships do fight a dreadnought, they are scuppered, basically. But if they fight anything else, they can take it on. Even a battle cruiser has to be careful about taking on one of these ships. They'll probably win. They'll be able to decide the engagement range, etc. But this ship is built for fighting, they're not. Especially the battle cruisers in this earlier period. So they make sense. They make sense. And that's often the case. But while we're talking about battleships, and here is the fun thing to talk about, and this is another one I'm adding into this. So why are people still building battleships at the end of the 1930s? Why is not everyone seeing that aircraft carriers are a coming thing? Why are they building newer, bigger, better battleships? That's because whilst aircraft are the coming thing, and a lot of people recognise that aircraft carriers are the coming capability, they're not the arrived capability. They're not. They're just not. It's one of those interesting things as a historian, the amount of times I have to explain that the aviation of 1945 is not the aviation of 1939. That the capabilities of aircraft in 1945 is not the capabilities of aircraft in 1939. And when they're making the procurement decisions that are going to affect the stuff which is going into World War II and being built in World War II, i.e. back in 1937-36, it's not. It's really not. There is a huge amount of technology which, it's going to sound strange, isn't necessarily created but comes to fruition. The biggest thing probably is the biggest step change in aircraft capabilities is the 2,000 horsepower engines. Yeah, it's not bombs, it's not aerodynamics, it's 2,000 horsepower engines. Aerodynamics and things come later, but realistically, 2,000 plus horsepower engines, they turn single-engine aircraft, which are maneuverable enough to do most of the jobs, into something which can actually carry a viable weapon load, which can be dangerous to anything. And you see, whilst, yes, torpedo bombers, etc., have demonstrated their capability to put holes in ships and make them sink, that only works in a scenario where there's a sky which is flexible for you, i.e. if you're at night for the Royal Navy and going into Taranto, because then the Italians can't really do anything much about you. If they fire AA guns at you, they're not going to send up fighters, they're not going to be able to do that. Or if you're in large numbers, like the Japanese at various points. But there's no, and in the case of Force Z, of course, there's not even any fighters or anything to defend them, which is a good thing, because those torpedo bombers are at the absolute maximum extent of their range and are practically running out of fuel. But they do it, and got no defensive weapons on them either. It's an absolute Hail Mary shot, and it's an amazing feat they pull it off. But it's also a case of, okay, this possibly isn't a good model to try and recreate, because if there was a single carrier there, even something as bad as HMS Hermes, or USS Langley in her carrier form rather than her seaplane form, or Hosho even, Any of those early first built carriers with just a few fighters aboard, those aircraft are getting knocked out of the sky. Fighters combined with the heavy AA, those aircraft never get through. They're too broken up. They're too piecemeal. They're not getting any hits in at all because they've got nothing to deter the fighters with. The fighters will basically be doing practice shots because they'll be just going up, going, "Oh, you can't fire at me. Okay, I can get really close to you before I engage. I don't need to do a zoom and boom. I can just do a zoom, boom. You're not firing at me. Okay, I come round and just follow you and just go bang, bang, bang." It will be a massacre. The thing is, though, once you have those fighter capabilities, okay, that's great. That's your air defensive carrier. But the offensive capability of the anti-ship, of the ship-killing capability, still rests to an extent with the battleship. Why? Because whilst if you get a torpedo hit in, if you get there are enough bombs in, you might be able to kill an enemy battleship. The way you can guarantee to kill them is pummel them to death, which is what these things exist to do. And you really don't want your aircraft carrier in range of that, because whilst your aircraft carrier's aircraft might be able to kill a battleship, and that's up until, early in the 1940s, not 1940, but that's the point. Your battleship, if it finds your aircraft carrier in range of its guns, is going to kill your aircraft carrier. That's not even going to be a contest. That's going to be a goodbye. And the Royal Navy can demonstrate that. One of the interesting things about history is that we all remember the sinking of battleships by aircraft. People forget the aircraft carriers which were sunk by battleships. If a battleship manages to get within range, that carrier's dead. Now, the point is, as time goes on, as aircraft get better, as their range gets better with carrying larger weapon loads to greater range, as you get better airborne radar, as you get all the systems which allow you to search and find surface ships, that range increases to a point at which it's very unlikely a battleship's going to get within that range. Yeah. Then your battleship becomes secondary roles. Things like a command ship. Things like an escort for your carrier. Things like a shore bombardment vessel for amphibious warfare. A very useful tool for that one. But but the point is still useful. The role of the battleship might change, but it was still useful. And that's why it survived as long as it did. Again, they didn't all disappear at the end of World War II. They carried on, and this is why we have some wonderfully preserved vessels in the world today. It's also another reason why I occasionally find another thing I add on to my list of reasons why my view of the British government is they have no understanding of the value of history. Please note this is merely me speaking as a naval historian, and the fact that they have managed to not preserve so little of their naval history, I find it personally an affront. We'll leave that to one side. The thing is, though, these were useful assets right the way through World War II. So when someone stands there and goes, "Oh, they should have been building battleships, they should have been building aircraft carriers," look at them and go, have you looked at the aircraft in 1937? Have you looked at the viability of those aircraft? And do you really think any of them justify what you're talking about? Because they don't. And the thing is, when you're doing procurement for a navy, you don't start going, "You know what, I'm going to take risks." No. You go, "That's the coming capability, I will build that. And that's the current capability, I will build that. And then I will have both. Because that is the sensible solution." The sensible option is to have both. So you're prepared for the future, but you're also safe for the now. And that is what gives you a strong fleet and a capability. It's kind of like, why do we keep flirting with the idea of taking deck guns off ships? Every time I talk it, I move it around, it turns up again. I swear, I hoped after the Falklands War it had finally been got rid of, but no, it's been coming back again recently as well. The idea of, let's take off deck guns, and you have other people going, well, let's put on more guns because they're useful. The argument always is, but a missile is better. A missile is better. It is an absolutely brilliant tool. But it's also more expensive, and you can carry a lot less of them than you can shells. And a gun is a general purpose asset, especially a modern deck gun. Because we're not talking about a 14-inch gun, we're talking about something which is closer to the 5.25s there, the dual purpose guns. That's what we're talking about with modern warships. That's what we're talking about if you fit in with a 6-inch gun, we're talking about a dual purpose weapon. Or a 3-inch weapon. All these modern weapons are dual purpose, and they're helpful. But yes, if you're looking for the best weapon system, which is the other point you get into, if you're looking for any specific operation, I have to say air defense, missile's best. Land attack, a missile's best. All these things, missile's best. It is. But how many missiles can you carry? Versus how many shells can you carry? And the sensible answer is to go, why not have both? Because then if you run out of missiles, the amount of space the gun takes up is not going to cost you a lot of missiles. But having the gun could save you a lot of missiles by using the gun instead, which means you have the missiles for when things are important enough that you really need them dead right now with those missiles. And that's being sensible. But occasionally navies do get caught by the high-tech. Usually it's... When I say navies, usually it's when there is a sort of wave going through the zeitgeist of the national culture and the government and the navy at the time of, we've got to be at the cutting edge of technology. And they forget the lessons, the blood-soaked lessons of the past of, yeah, you want to be at the cutting edge of technology, you also want to have the insurance for the cutting edge of technology. You always want to have both. But we're also still building wooden ships, until fairly recently. In fact, when I say fairly recently, well, the Avenger class here... Okay, so this is one of the things which always interests me, is that in the 1980s, while the Americans are building the Avenger class, which are... to an extent, they are wooden hulls. They are technically a coating of fiberglass over oak, Douglas fir, and Nootka cypress. The idea was to construct a hull which would give them strength against a nearby blast from mine, but also give them an incredibly low magnetic signature. That was it. But in contrast, other navies, including the Royal Navy, were going straight down the pure fiberglass route. Hunt class, Sandown class, both of these are fiberglass hulls. And they are really capable units. For both nations it makes sense though, because you're looking at something which is going to be proof against a magnetic mine, not to be set off a magnetic mine. And so that's what you're aiming for. That's what you're aiming for. So it makes sense. For the Americans, going down the wooden route gives them extra security, something they know which works, and they don't have to put too much effort into development and the cost of the science, etc., and research. Because even the US Navy in the 1980s doesn't have an infinite budget. And frankly, whilst it shouldn't probably be, to an extent, mine warfare, mine countermeasures in the US Navy has always been, I would say, since the end of World War II, a bit of a red-headed stepchild, to use the British phraseology. It's the kid which doesn't fit in the rest of the kids. They all like them, they all depend on them, they're a part of the family. But when you're looking at the picture and you're going, which of these ones is not funded like the other? Oh, that one. Whereas for some navies, mine warfare was still pretty important. And so they were prepared to put the funding and the research into developing those hulls. But the thing is, yes, you can get a better hull by going for a pure fiberglass hull. You can get something which is sweeter, which is finer. But do you need it to be? Do you need it to be? That is the question. And so this brings me to realistically the question I want to ask at the end of this video, because I thought it would be a nice place to end on the Avengers. As good as they were a really interesting design that have now been theoretically replaced in service by the literal combat ships. We'll move on. We'll move on before we get into that discussion. That's a whole long discussion, which might happen someday. Realistically, the question for today's video, and what I'm finishing on, is I want you to think about warfare. Not just naval warfare, but all warfare. I want to think about what areas do we need to have cutting-edge technology, what areas don't we? And that could well be nation-specific. I'm not going to say if it is or isn't. It might be. But there might be times when you need to invest to have the cutting edge in a certain area. There might be times you can afford to have the other capability. There might be times where you can't get the master capability you need for the missions you need to do by going the cutting edge route because you can't afford it. So I want you to think about that. And I want you to put it down and talk about, think about nations, not just today, but also through history and where they did it and didn't do it. With that being said, what do we have coming up? Well, this video will come out in just before the Battle of Lepanto. Ooh, that'd be a good video. It will be a very good video. Currently, the videos I've recorded for today, which included that video, the sound is all weird for some reason. I have no idea why. One video was fine, 4 videos were not. But it'll be recorded. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. If you like the video, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow, and thank you.